Someone makes a confident claim. Sounds smart, sounds authoritative. Everyone in the room nods. You feel a vague suspicion something is wrong, but can't locate it. You say nothing. Later, you find out it was completely false. You knew it felt off. You couldn't prove it. You stayed quiet. Meanwhile, a homicide detective sits across from a suspect who has rehearsed his alibi for 3 weeks, coached himself, practiced the story until it feels like memory. The detective listens for 11 minutes, then asks one question. The alibi collapses completely. Same information available to everyone in that room. Same words spoken out loud. The detective heard something structurally different, not because he's smarter, because he runs every claim through a reasoning filter that most people don't know exists. That filter has a name. It has documented components. It is completely teachable, and it works on everything. Bad arguments in meetings, manipulative people in your life, your own thinking when it's leading you somewhere wrong, media, advertising, politics, anywhere someone wants you to believe something that serves their interest more than yours. I'm about to show you exactly what that filter is. By the end of this, nobody will ever fool you again. Chapter 1. The structure problem. Here's what most people never learn. Every argument has two completely separate components: the conclusion and the reasoning connecting evidence to that conclusion. Most people evaluate only the conclusion. Does this sound right? Do I agree? Does this match what I already believe? Detectives evaluate the structure, not whether the conclusion sounds plausible, whether the reasoning actually supports it. These are completely different questions. A conclusion can be true and the reasoning supporting it can be garbage. A conclusion can be false and the reasoning can be logically valid. Structure and truth are independent variables. Conflating them is how intelligent people get consistently fooled. Aristotle documented the basic logical fallacies in 350 BC. There are now over 300 cataloged formal and informal ones, but 4 appear in almost every misleading argument you will ever encounter. The first is false causation. Event A happened before event B. Therefore, A caused B. Crime rates dropped after the new mayor took office. The mayor reduced crime. Maybe. Or maybe crime was already declining for unrelated demographic reasons, and the mayor arrived at the bottom of the curve. Correlation and causation are not the same thing, ever. Without a control mechanism explaining how A produces B, sequence proves nothing. The second is the false dilemma. You either support this policy or you don't care about children. You're either with us or against us. Two options presented as the only options when reality contains dozens. The moment someone presents exactly 2 choices on a complex issue, the argument is almost certainly manipulative. Reality is not binary. Binary framing is a compression that always serves whoever created the frame. The third is the appeal to authority. Studies show, experts agree, scientists say, which studies, which experts, which scientists. An appeal to unnamed authority is not evidence. It is the costume evidence wears when evidence is unavailable. Always ask for the specific source, the specific study, the specific expert. Watch how often the costume falls off when you pull at it. The fourth is the slippery slope. If we allow X, eventually Y will happen, then Z, then catastrophe. Maybe. Or maybe X happens and nothing else follows because each step in the chain requires independent conditions that may never materialize. Slippery slope arguments can be valid when the causal chain is documented. They are almost never documented. They are almost always speculation dressed as logical inevitability. Learn these 4. You now hear the structural failures in roughly 70% of bad arguments before the sentence finishes. Chapter 2. The Sherlock Method. Here's what Conan Doyle actually based Holmes on. A real person. Dr. Joseph Bell, Edinburgh surgeon. Doyle's medical school professor. Bell would observe a patient walk through the door and before the patient spoke would announce his occupation, recent travels, dominant hand, and general health history. Accurately. Every time. Not magic. A documented observational method, Bell called reasoning from evidence to hypothesis rather than from hypothesis to evidence. Most people reason backward. They form a conclusion first, then collect evidence to support it. This is called confirmation bias, and it is the single most destructive thinking error a human brain makes. It feels like reasoning. It isn't. It is conclusion shopping dressed in the clothes of investigation. Bell and Holmes reason forward. Collect raw observations first. Generate multiple competing hypotheses. Identify what evidence would distinguish between them. Collect that specific evidence. Eliminate hypotheses until one remains. Only then conclude. Psychologist Peter Wason proved how rare this is in 1960. He showed subjects 4 cards. Each had a number on one side and a color on the other. He showed EK, 4, and 7. Then stated a rule. If a card has a vowel on one side, it has an even number on the other. Which cards must you turn over to test this rule? Most people said E and 4. Wrong. E and 7. You need E to confirm vowels have even numbers. You need 7 to check if an odd number has a vowel hiding on its back. The 4 is irrelevant. Even if 4 has a vowel behind it, that doesn't violate the rule. Most people only look for confirming evidence. The card that would prove them right. The detective always looks for the card that would prove them wrong, because this confirming evidence is the only kind that actually tests whether you're correct. Before concluding anything important, ask one question. What evidence would prove me wrong about this? If you can't answer that question, your belief is not a reasoned conclusion. It is a preference you haven't examined. Hit subscribe before you forget. The next chapter is the one that protects you from the most sophisticated manipulation you will ever encounter. Chapter 3. The Frame Audit. Here's the deepest layer of the reasoning filter that almost nobody ever develops. Every argument arrives inside a frame, a set of assumed premises so foundational they are never stated out loud. The frame defines which questions are askable, which comparisons are natural, which conclusions feel obvious. Whoever controls the frame controls the conclusion before the argument begins. Linguist George Lakoff at Berkeley spent 40 years studying political framing. His central finding: when you argue inside someone else's frame, you have already lost regardless of how good your counter evidence is, because the frame selects which evidence feels relevant and which feels like a distraction. Tax relief. The word relief implies taxation is a burden requiring relief. The moment you accept that frame, every argument about tax policy happens inside a worldview you never agreed to. You're arguing about how much relief instead of whether relief is the right concept. The frame did that. Before you said a single word, detectives are trained to audit frames before engaging arguments. Who constructed this frame? What does accepting this frame require me to assume is already true? What questions become unaskable inside this frame? What alternative frames exist for this same situation? The frame audit is 3 questions asked before engaging any argument. What is being assumed without being stated? Who benefits if I accept this framing? What would this situation look like from a completely different starting premise? Those 3 questions expose the architecture beneath the argument. Once you see the architecture, you can choose whether to accept it. Most people never see it. They argue the furniture while someone else designed the building. Philosopher Daniel Dennett called this Steelmanning. Before you argue against a position, build the strongest possible version of that position, stronger than its actual proponent built it. If you can't defeat the strongest version of the opposing argument, you haven't actually understood what you're disagreeing with. You've defeated a weakened caricature and called it victory. This practice does something uncomfortable. It regularly reveals that positions you confidently opposed have stronger foundations than you believed. That discomfort is the reasoning system working correctly. Certainty that survives Steelmanning is certainty worth having. Certainty that collapses under the strongest version of opposition was never certainty. It was comfort. Here's the problem, though. You can spot structural fallacies. You can reason forward from evidence. You can audit frames. And you will still get manipulated by the one technique that bypasses all logical defenses completely: emotional loading. When information arrives wrapped in strong emotion, the brain's evaluation system partially disengages. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt at NYU spent 2 decades proving this. Moral and political judgments are made emotionally first and rationally post hoc. The reasoning you think produced your conclusion usually arrived after the conclusion was already made and exists primarily to justify it. The countermeasure is a mandatory cooling period before any high-stakes conclusion. When you feel strong emotion in response to an argument, that is precisely the moment to withhold judgment. Not to suppress the emotion. To note that strong emotion is present and explicitly delay conclusion by 24 hours. The emotional response will still be there tomorrow if it's valid. The distortion it created will have partially cleared. Detectives are trained never to fall in love with a suspect. The moment you emotionally commit to a theory, you stop investigating and start prosecuting. Every piece of new, Evidence gets bent to fit the theory you're already attached to. Cases collapse. Innocent people go to prison. The same dynamic destroys businesses, relationships, and careers outside interrogation rooms every single day. To keep it simple, stupid. Learn the 4 structural fallacies and hear them automatically. Reason forward from evidence and always look for disconfirming data. Audit every frame before engaging any argument. And install a mandatory delay between strong emotional response and final conclusion. You were never a bad thinker. You were running unexamined reasoning hardware in a world full of people who know exactly how to exploit it. Now you see the hardware. Now you can upgrade it. But here's the thing. Sharper reasoning compounds only when your brain retains the frameworks long enough to apply them. Most people learn thinking tools and lose them within a week because they never lock the knowledge in. That's why I made this video breaking down the exact memory system that makes every framework you learn permanently available when you need it. It's almost unfair. Watch it next.